Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to News Dose. And, I kind of feel like this year in 2024, there's been a shift for the game industry, and not necessarily in a good way. I mean, I tend to be a little bit more on the optimistic side of things, but at the same time, I'd have to be blind not to notice that the game industry is, yes, going down a very dangerous road. And in this case, I'm specifically pointing to the AAA part of the game industry. We're starting to see more and more high-profile failures on a more regular cadence. And I want to talk about that today because the former PlayStation boss had some rather interesting observations, and I think a lot of gamers can kind of resonate with what he said and why this generation is just so often scrutinized for feeling a little less impressive than expected. At the end of the day, are these companies actually focusing on the right things? And I think for most of them, that's a hard no. So we'll get into that a little bit later on in the video, but for our first topic, I do want to talk about a game that I feel is focusing on the right things, and that's Expedition 33. This is an independent JRPG that is now set to release in spring of 2025, and I think it just looks absolutely incredible. It reminds me a lot of Lost Odyssey, which in my opinion is secretly one of the best JRPGs to ever exist. And every time I see or I hear about Expedition 33, I just kind of think to myself, this game has so much potential. The visuals are striking. I like the character designs. The atmosphere seems creative. I like the way the combat looks. It looks innovative for a game like this. And as long as they can kind of give us a well-rounded gameplay experience with an interesting story, then I think this really could be a special JRPG when it releases next year, again in spring of 2025. So I think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic about Expedition 33, and now you can add even more reasons to that because they just posted this up over on Twitter. They said that we've seen a few questions regarding the price and expected playtime of Expedition 33. We are a small team with an indie spirit, and we're creating something that we believe is truly special. We aren't a AAA studio. This is our first game, and we want as many people discovering our world as possible. To be clear, we poured all our hearts and souls into this game. When you play Expedition 33, you can expect 30 plus hours of main game and as much side content for our completionist expeditioners. Pricing that you see from your local retailers is accurate, and we can't wait for you to get your hands on the game. See you in the spring. So it will be a $50 game, and from a playtime perspective, Expedition 33 will be on par with a traditional Final Fantasy experience, and I think that's just incredible for a small team like this. It's not that it just looks like a AAA experience from a visual standpoint, but it's also apparently packed with a lot of content. Let's just kind of hope that the content is as good as it looks, but in the meantime, Expedition 33 looks good, it sounds good, and I think this is definitely one of the more exciting games to look forward to in 2025. Now, as a bit of a side note, I'm also happy to hear that it will get a physical release as well. Physical for the win. Now, speaking of being happy, I'm thrilled to say that It Takes Two has officially sold 20 million copies worldwide. Who said that 3D platformers can't sell? But seriously, this is an absolutely amazing game. If you haven't already played it, I'd highly recommend it. I think this is just flat out one of the best games that's released within the last 3 years, especially in terms of cooperative games. I'd even go so far as to say that this is one of the best co-op games to ever exist, just period. And that's because of how insanely creative it is. It's really not just a 3D platformer. It's so much more than that, and it's just a blast to play. So big congrats to Hazelight. We're going to talk about the AAA side of the game industry here in a moment, but Hazelight is one of the good studios doing things the right way, and that's by being innovative and by focusing on fun gameplay. For that matter, they're also teasing a brand new IP, and just kind of knowing their history, I think this could be a possible reveal for the Game Awards in December. Obviously, Joseph Fares is well known for his Game Awards speech years ago, and that's also where they revealed It Takes Two. Either which way, I cannot wait to see what they're working on next. Now, we also have an acquisition to talk about, and this one might come off as some surprise because Certain Affinity was picked up by Keywords Studios. Of course, Certain Affinity has a long history with Xbox and Halo, and, in fact, Certain Affinity was formed by former Bungie staff. And since then, they've been one of Xbox's go-to support studios for the Halo franchise. This goes all the way back to 2007 when they helped out with Halo 2, and since then they've worked on Halo Reach, Halo Anniversary, Halo 4, the Master Chief Collection, and also Halo Infinite. Reportedly, they were even working on a Battle Royale mode for Halo Infinite until it eventually got canceled. So, Affinity was always one of those studios that drew a lot of speculation as an Xbox acquisition target, but instead, lo and behold, they got picked up by somebody else. Now, hopefully this will work out for them, though, because they do still have a new original game in development. Okay, so let's go and have a conversation about this generation of consoles and the AAA game space. I think a lot of us clearly see that the game industry is not necessarily in a super healthy state. There are some major concerns on the horizon, and I can point to a plethora of different reasons. But Shawn Layden, the former PlayStation boss, recently said something very interesting that I think rings true for a lot of gamers and how they felt throughout this generation. He said the cost of gaming has gotten so high, the budgets are just so out of control, that has caused a collapse of creativity. And he said that developers used to make games with the focus of being fun, but that's no longer the case. He said, quote unquote, today, the entry cost for making a AAA game is in triple-digit millions now. I think naturally risk tolerance drops. And you're looking at sequels, you're looking at copycats, because the finance guys who draw the line say, well, if Fortnite made this much money in this amount of time, my Fortnite knockoff can make this in that amount of time. We're seeing a collapse of creativity in games today with studio consolidation and the high cost of production. And this is something that we've talked about in the past. It almost feels like these companies are focused on the wrong things. They're focused on monetization. They're focused on the latest trend and how they can capitalize on that, even though it's going to take them apparently 6 years to develop said game. See, I feel like for a long time, games were not about chasing a trend. It was about innovation. It was about people who love games. You know, the people who created games, they were passionate about bringing their imagination to life in a video game. And they wanted to push the boundary of what you could do in a virtual world. But I don't really get the sense that our current developers, and maybe it's not necessarily their fault. I mean, it could be the finance people like Shawn Layden kind of alluded to here, but I don't get the sense that there's that same passion and that love for creativity that we used to see in the gaming space. I mean, you would think the bigger the budget, the better the game. But apparently all of the money in the world and the long development times that we're seeing can't ensure that these games are good. And maybe what Shawn Layden is saying here is the reason why. The business people have taken over the game industry. When they go in and pitch a game, they're not pitching a game based on how fun it is. Instead, they're having to pitch the idea of, this is how we can make the most money, this is how we can monetize said game. It's like these business people, they think they can either chase a trend or they can just push out a pretty game and call it a day. And Shawn Layden also had something to say about that as well. He claimed that the console arm race is over and that gamers aren't interested in marginally more powerful machines. And again, I think that he makes a fair point. We are at a point of diminishing returns. I think for most people, visuals for the PlayStation 4 were fine. But what we really want from the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5 are just fun games with better performance. But that's one of the most baffling things about this generation. That was the selling point going into these consoles, 60 FPS games. But we still have certain studios that prioritizes shiny visuals and effects that I don't think most gamers even care about. Even PlayStation themselves recently said that 75% of PlayStation 5 owners prefer to play on performance mode. So again, when you hear something like that, are these studios actually listening to what we want? You know, meanwhile, you have a company like Nintendo out here, and they make underpowered hardware, but their games sell incredibly well. And I think that kind of tells you something. So I think Shawn Layden made some great points. I don't think these companies are necessarily listening to what gamers want. I think the game industry needs to self-correct. They need to listen to gamers more. They need to lower the budgets. having a $300 million budget, that just doesn't feel sustainable. These development times for games are far too long. You look back to the PS3, the Xbox 360. I remember the days when we were able to get multiple games for a single franchise in a generation. Now we're lucky if we get one game from a single studio. So that needs to be fixed. And also give creatives more control and trust that they can actually deliver on a fun product the gamers will buy. In fact, if you just lower the budget and development time, you're not going to have to sell 6 million copies simply to break even. But this is just my opinion. Let me know what you all think about what Shawn Layden had to say. Do you agree with him that the game industry has lost its creative mindset? And do you agree that gamers don't just want marginally more powerful hardware? Now, speaking of PlayStation's former boss, we do have a future PlayStation exclusive to talk about, and that's Insomniac's Wolverine. According to the insider Curicasis, they said, "From my little digging, it looks like Sony is gearing up to show off some new stuff from Marvel's Wolverine. It's hard for me to determine when it'll happen, but I'm guessing it'll be this year, either at the Game Awards or at some unannounced super secret event." Now, if this is correct information, then I'm going to go ahead and second the Game Awards. Makes sense here. It always has a high viewership, and considering Wolverine is a well-known licensed IP, this would be the perfect way for Sony to get it in front of as many people as they possibly can and to really build onto that hype moving into 2025. A Wolverine PlayStation-developed game would automatically be one of the most talked about reveals for the Game Awards. If it does get revealed there, though, that does also beg the question of when it'll release. Could this be a 2025 game? I mean, there for a while, there was a rumor that it could release possibly next year, and hey, if it does, then their lineup is starting to shape up. Of course, they have Ghost of Yotei as well, and this could be a nice 1-2 punch for them. Either which way, though, this is definitely something to keep an eye on if you're a fan of Wolverine. Anyways, that's going to be it for this episode, but until next time, hit that subscribe button, and peace out.